I never thought art would change the course of my life, much less my relationship with my family. But looking back, it all makes sense now. My name is Claire Miller, and this is the story of how my stepson's passion for painting opened doors that none of us expected and how, in the most unlikely way, I became his muse. When I first married Thomas Miller, I stepped into a family already halfway formed. He was a widower, raising his teenage son, Ethan, who was 16 at the time. Being a stepmother was not something I had ever envisioned for myself. I had always thought I would marry younger, start fresh with someone single, and build a family from the ground up. Life had other plans. Thomas was kind, stable, and patient. He had weathered storms I could only imagine, having lost his first wife, Sarah, to illness years before. Ethan was polite, but distant when we first met. He was tall for his age, with messy brown hair that always seemed like it needed a trim, and a quiet intensity that made him stand out among other kids his age. While other boys spent their time glued to video games or football practice, Ethan carried a sketchbook everywhere. He doodled on napkins, the edges of his homework, even scraps of receipts left on the counter. At first, I thought it was just a hobby, but soon I realized it was much more than that. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into the living room and found him crouched over a large pad of paper, his pencil moving furiously. He didn't notice me at first, his eyes darting between the page and the vase of sunflowers I had set out on the table. His hands were smudged with graphite, and his brow was furrowed with concentration. When he finally looked up, startled by my presence, he quickly closed the pad as if embarrassed. "Sorry," he mumbled. "What are you sorry for?" I asked with a smile. "I didn't mean to be in the way." "You're not in the way," I said softly. "Can I see?" He hesitated, then opened the sketchbook just enough for me to peek. My breath caught. The sunflowers I had casually arranged looked alive on the page. The shading, the depth, the detail, it was as if the flowers were breathing. "Ethan, this is incredible," I whispered. His cheeks flushed, and he shrugged. "It's nothing. Just practice." But I knew it wasn't nothing. It was talent, raw and real. As months passed, Ethan's passion for art grew. He started experimenting with paints, charcoal, and even clay. I tried my best to encourage him without pushing too hard. I bought him supplies when I could, sometimes under the guise of gifts, sometimes just because I wanted him to have what he needed. Thomas, though supportive, was practical. He worried about Ethan's future and whether art could provide stability. But I believed in nurturing what gave Ethan's life meaning. One evening, about a year after Thomas and I married, Ethan came into the kitchen while I was preparing dinner. He looked nervous, clutching his sketchbook like it held some great secret. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course," I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. I want to paint people. Portraits. But I need someone to practice on." "Would you?" He trailed off, his eyes darting to the floor. "You want me to pose for you?" I asked. He nodded quickly. I paused, considering. It was flattering in a way, and I could see how much it meant to him. "Sure," I said finally. "I'd be honored." That weekend, we set up a little studio space in the den. The old room had good natural light in the afternoons, and Ethan arranged his easel, paints, and brushes with meticulous care. He asked me to sit in a simple chair by the window, my hands folded in my lap. At first, I felt self-conscious. Sitting still while someone stared at you, especially your stepson, was awkward. I fidgeted, glanced around, and tried not to laugh. But Ethan was focused, his eyes moving between me and the canvas with that same intense concentration I had seen before. Slowly, the awkwardness faded. The room grew quiet except for the scratch of his brush against canvas and the distant ticking of the old clock on the wall. Hours passed, and I began to see the process differently. Ethan wasn't just painting me. He was studying me, noticing things I didn't even notice about myself. The curve of my jaw, the way light hit my hair, the small lines around my eyes when I smiled. I realized that in his eyes, I wasn't just stepmom Claire. I was a subject, a figure worthy of being captured on canvas. When he finally showed me the finished piece weeks later, I was stunned. It wasn't just a likeness, it was me, but also more than me. It carried warmth, strength, and softness all at once. It was as though he had painted not just my face, but the way he saw me. From then on, posing became a regular part of our routine. Sometimes I sat reading a book while he sketched. Sometimes he asked me to wear a certain color or sit a certain way. Once, he had me hold a basket of apples because he liked the way the red contrasted with my dress. With each portrait, I noticed a shift. Our conversations grew deeper, more open. He began telling me about school, about missing his mom, about how he sometimes felt like he didn't fit in. In turn, I shared parts of myself I hadn't before. I told him about my own childhood, my love for stories, and how I once dreamed of becoming a writer. Somewhere in those afternoons of quiet painting, trust blossomed between us. One day, Thomas walked in unexpectedly while Ethan was painting me. He froze in the doorway, watching silently. Ethan didn't notice at first, but I did. For a moment, I worried Thomas might think it strange, me sitting there as his son painted. But instead, Thomas smiled softly, almost proudly. "He gets that from his mom," Thomas said later that night as we sat in bed. "Sarah loved to draw." I didn't think he remembered, but maybe he did. That explained so much. Art wasn't just a hobby, it was a legacy. The months rolled on, and Ethan's work flourished. He entered local art shows, often with me as the subject of his portraits. People started to notice his talent. A gallery owner even approached him about showcasing his work. I could see Ethan's confidence growing, his shoulders straighter, his voice stronger. And through it all, he still called me his muse. At first, I laughed at the idea. Me a muse? But the more I thought about it, the more I understood. Being his muse wasn't just about posing. It was about being someone who believed in him, someone who gave him the courage to express himself. I realized then that we weren't just stepmother and stepson anymore. We were collaborators in a strange, beautiful way. He brought out parts of me I didn't know were there, the patience to sit still, the openness to be seen in a new light, the courage to support him even when others doubted. Years later, Ethan earned a scholarship to study art in New York. At his farewell exhibit in our hometown, the centerpiece was a large portrait he had painted of me. Standing beside it, he introduced me not just as his stepmother, but as his muse, his supporter, his family. I cried that night, not because I was sad to see him go, but because I knew we had built something lasting. Art had given us a bond stronger than words, and it all began with one simple request: to sit still and let him paint.